And good evening, everyone. My name is Evan Weiner, and I want to thank Robin for inviting me to the library tonight. We happen to be coinciding with the start of the World Series, which will start in about 1 hour and 10 minutes. And that guy there in that picture, of course, was in a lot of World Series. And if you were a kid of the 1950s, you know who he was. He was Yogi Berra. And I got to know Yogi over the years by speaking over at the Yogi Berra Museum in Montclair. And he would come to a good number of my talks, and he'd listen, and he afterwards would pat me on the back and say, "Good job, kid, good job." And I thought that was the absolute apex of any kind of compliment you could get. That was Yogi Berra telling me, "Good job, kid, good job." Of course, Yogi was a major part of baseball and the culture for decades. In fact, for 2 centuries, the 20th century and the 21st century. My background is radio and TV. I have written op-ed pieces for the Bergen Record in your neck of the woods, although I don't think the Bergen Record got down that far south. I worked at WNEW radio for a while. I was on TV with Sam Donaldson. Also, I did an appearance on MSNBC, among other things, wrote for magazines, newspapers, on radio, and on TV. And I got to cover the Yankees and the Mets in the 1980s. And I have some stories about people like Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio, and of course, Yogi and some others. But let's go back to 1954. 1954, there was a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Barzun, and he was writing a series of essays in 1954, which would eventually turn into a book about life and American life. And in 1954, he wrote, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And you should do so. Don't go to a major league game. That may not work out as well as going to, say, a little league game, or a youth game in your neighborhood, or a high school game, or an industrial league game." A lot of industrial league teams back in those days. And you could really see how baseball operated. And baseball was such a major part of the American experience in 1954. Coincidentally, Yogi Berra was not in the World Series in 1954. One of 2 years in the 1950s that he was not in the World Series. Baseball and the culture. You get Casey at the bat. He's crying. Couldn't get the game-winning run in. He struck out at the bottom of the 9th inning. Casey at the bat. Ernest Thayer. Ernest Thayer and I have one thing in common. Ernest Thayer was a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner in the 19th century. He wrote some pieces between 1886 and 1888. And I wrote a couple pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the 21st century, 2001. So we have that in common. Ernest Thayer was an essayist, and sometimes what happens is when you have to write a lot, and I've written in my lifetime almost 4,000 radio commentaries and probably a couple hundred more newspaper articles, commentaries, and you kind of run out of ideas, or you think your ideas aren't that good. Casey at the Bat's printed on June the 3rd, 1888. There is no author's credit. Thayer doesn't take any credit for it. He would read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895. But he didn't think very much of the poem. But there were people who did, like this guy, DeWolf Hopper. If you were a child of the 50s and 60s, you know DeWolf Hopper's daughter, Heather Hopper, who was initially an actress, and she became a gossip columnist and a regular on television. She's some sort of personality on shows in the 1960s on TV. But anyway, DeWolf Hopper happened to like this poem. Now, I don't know exactly, nobody has ever explained how DeWolf Hopper got a hold of this poem. San Francisco was a town across the Rocky Mountains. I mean, it was the Rocky Mountains in the 1880s, and then San Francisco. There was nothing out there. But somehow he gets a copy of the San Francisco newspaper, looks at the poem, and says, "I'm going to do something with this poem. It's a great poem." Well, he does. It becomes a vaudeville act. And he hits the stage on August 14th, 1888, almost 10 weeks after the poem is printed. Thayer never claims credit for it. The poem is out there, and Wolf Hopper is playing on vaudeville stages and wherever else people played in the 1880s. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times in his life, going from town to town to town, vaudeville, put it on record. He was in a silent movie also, and also wherever they put out shingles or put out a floor, Hopper was there performing this thing. And if you wanted to listen to Hopper, well, you weren't going to listen to Hopper on that. That's the Springfield, New Jersey Library, not too far from you. And they have a big room where you do your talk. And in the room is that thing that I'm pointing at called the Regina Sublimina. There was apparently a guy in town who was a hermit who collected all kinds of things in Springfield, and he passed away. They didn't know what to do with the stuff, so they gave it to the library. And that's a little historic room that they have in Springfield. And they have that. Now, if you look at it closely, there's a big cylinder in there, and there looks like there's this huge needle going around, which is what it is, and it's a recording device. And in 1893, you could get, if you have one of those, and you get one of those big cylinders, you could actually bring to your house a copy, voice copy of Casey at the Bat, done by this guy, Russell Hunting. He was an actor, and he played around with sound recordings, one of the first people to play around with sound recordings. And he does it in 1893. He does it again in 1898. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue, which makes sense because Casey might have been Irish. We don't know who Casey is. Thayer never said who Casey was. Who is Casey? Could have been Mike King Kelly, played in New England. Around the time that Thayer wrote the poem, could have been somebody from Stockton, California. Stockton claims that it was them in their city that somebody struck out with the bases loaded. When the minor league season gets going next year, 2021, there was no minor league season this year, depending on COVID vaccines and COVID treatments and all that other stuff. There is a team in Stockton called the Mudville Nine. Hunting does the recording again, 1898. In both recordings, he uses a heavy Irish brogue. Now, John Kaiser went over to Menlo Park, which isn't far from Summit, and recorded it for Thomas Edison. Hopper's version was recorded for Victor. You remember RCA Victor with Nipper the dog, his master's voice. That doesn't come out until 1906. So by 1906, there are 4 recordings of this. 2 of them on records, 2 of them on cylinders. So if you were in a household, say in 1910, and you liked the new fandangled thing called records, you could very easily have a record of Hopper or Kaiser doing Casey at the Bat. And that is Sagaway, Quebec. Some guy's garage. He opened the garage up and all kind of junk is in there. And I love junk. And I went right to this old phonograph. And I told my wife, I need a picture of that because it's perfect for my baseball talk. Yeah, you just crank it up, you throw the record down, and you could hear the Mighty Casey had struck out. And the Mighty Casey striking out, I was at PS 151. It was 4th grade. So more than likely in the 1965 portion of 4th grade as opposed to 1964 because it was baseball season. And Miss Alexander was my teacher. Miss Alexander, she had the blue hair. Remember the blue hair? And she had the right here, stuck right here in her white blouse, a napkin in case her nose ran. She just could go like that. And she had the blue skirt and the white stockings and all that other stuff. Typical 65-year-old woman teacher who's married to her job. And she gives us an assignment. Analyze Casey at the Bat. I'm in 4th grade. I watch baseball. I watch Yankee games. I watch Mets games. And the Mets were, that was a terrible team, right? Yankees, hey, they were in the World Series. They were hitting down, they were sliding down the sliding pond into oblivion. I said, he's a lousy baseball player. Strikes out, game's on the line, strikes out. There's no joy in Mudville for the mighty Casey who struck out. That's it. No. Miss Alexander was insistent that I had missed the whole meaning of the poem, that it's about man's failures, that man is set up to succeed and could fail. I didn't buy that explanation. I thought he was a lousy baseball player. And, Thayer never really talked about it. He would read the poem in 1895 at a Harvard class reunion. But, for him, it was just, I don't know, maybe a throwaway. But it becomes an American classic. It really becomes something ingrained in the culture, which leads to the next question. Was baseball a catalyst in the American culture that people gravitated to it? Or did things outside of baseball make baseball more popular, like Casey at the bat? Hopper would commit the verse to film. That would be in 1922, a short subject silent film by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery starred in another silent film, a 1927 version of it. Bob Hope's Second Banana, for those of you who are old enough to remember Bob Hope. Jerry Colonna was his second banana, and he recorded a rendition for Disney, which later provided the basis for a 1946 Disney cartoon of Casey at the bat. Jackie Gleason performed it on his television show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others voiced the poem in orchestral settings. And then there was this memorable reading of Casey at the bat in Tampa for the benefit of the Tampa Police Benevolent Association, where George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin, dressed in tuxedos, read the poem for charity. I don't think George fired them that night. Now, if you take a look at this sign, and if I was with you, unfortunately, I'm not with you, I'm Zoom, but if I was there, I'd go around the room and ask you, what's that sign? What do you think of that sign? And it's on the New York City subway, 1908. It's a sign that's hanging there next to Dr. Zinsmore, who probably was there selling his zit medicine and remove your zits, because that's all over New York City subways. Anyway, ball game today at the Polo Grounds. Ball game today. New York Giants are playing. New York Giants, 3 o'clock games. Hop on the subway, get out to the Polo Grounds. But there was one guy who was sitting on the subway looking at that picture and looking at that picture and looking at that picture. His name, Jack Norworth. He's a songwriter. He was the guy who wrote the music. And he had been dating a woman who apparently kind of liked baseball. And he got an idea in his head. Why don't I write a song about baseball? A song that has been popular since 1908, that gained real popularity at Wrigley Field in Chicago. The late Harry Carey, who I worked with in 1994, briefly. The late Harry Carey, which you don't see there, is Harry's 6 best friends named Bud, as in Budweiser. He used the sponsor's product during the game. Anyway, top of the 7th inning is over. Bottom 7th inning is coming, and Harry sings this song from 1908 in between the top of the 7th inning and the bottom of the 7th inning. It's called Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And it's a Wrigley Field tradition now in Chicago. Well, maybe not this year because of COVID, but there's a catch. They have celebrities singing this song in between the top of the 7th and bottom of the 7th inning. And there's a catch. Harry had a horrible voice. And if you're invited to sing, you have to sing it the worst way possible. And people have done it the worst way possible. Let's talk a little bit about the song. Norworth gets it in his head. I'm going to write this song. And he talks to his partner, Albert von Tilzer. And Norworth's got the music. Von Tilzer has to write the words. And you know the words. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. We will root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Now, you know that. You know that stanza, but do you know the rest of the song? Let's talk about the rest of the song. Jack Norwith may have dated or did date a woman who probably was a suffragette. She was looking to get ahead in life. She wanted to vote, among other things. They break up, and he goes on. But he starts thinking about this song. And Katie Casey is invented for this song. We think Katie might have been from Brooklyn or Manhattan, but if she was taking the subway, she was probably going to the Giants game. And she is with a friend, a boyfriend, brother, or husband. And whoever she's with, and it's probably a date, they're going back and forth while they're on the subway. What are we going to do today? Remember, game started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Katie says, let's go to the ball game. Boyfriend says, no, we're not. Yes, we are. No, we're not. That's the first stanza of the song. They're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Finally, Katie gets upset. Katie screams out, take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Well, we don't know if Katie ever went to the ball game. We don't know that at all. Before I get into the third stanza, there was somebody who was or wrote for the Washington Post last year. And she wrote an op-ed piece. And that op-ed piece was about how Take Me Out to the Ball Game might have been the first women's liberation song. Because women, particularly people of Katie's age, we assume Katie's somewhere between 19 and 24 years old at the time, back in 1908, women just didn't go to baseball games. They didn't go to baseball games at all. It was looked down upon. Baseball players were looked down as ruffians, as villains. They were vaudevillians too. They were actors. They weren't exactly the cream of society. So women, it was frowned upon them going to a baseball game. But Katie wanted to go to a baseball game. And then the third stanza of the song is pretty simple. Katie knows what to do to get when she gets the game. She knows what to do to get the players going. We don't know exactly what they meant by that, but she knew all the players. She knew all the players. They didn't have numbers on their back. They didn't have their names on their back, but she knew all the players, and she knew how to get them aroused. Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Written in 1908, 112 years later, it's still the most popular song from 1908. It is played between, under normal circumstances, February and November at baseball parks. It wasn't played at the baseball park until the 1934 World Series. Detroit Tigers, St. Louis Cardinals in Detroit. That's when the first time it was played at a Major League Baseball park. As far as the songwriters go, Norwith never saw a baseball game until 1928. It's the first time he ever saw a baseball game. Von Tilzer, he saw a baseball game in 1940, 32 years after he wrote the song. The song would become famous on the vaudeville stage. It was written or was sung by Nora Bayes, who was Norwith's wife. She popularized the song in 1908, 1909, on the boards on the vaudeville stage, along with another song called Shine On Harvest Moon. Before I get into the next part of this, I just want to emphasize that in 1910, William Howard Taft started 2 baseball traditions. He threw out the first pitch in Washington, President William Howard Taft, and he also started the 7th inning stretch. It was April 14th, 1910, that the suffragettes would meet with Taft in the Oval Office, and Taft was getting very, very upset with the suffragettes, couldn't deal with the suffragettes. They were in town to talk about how to get the vote. So Taft slips a note to one of his aides, get me out of here, take me out to the ball game. See what you could do. I want to see opening day with the Washington Nationals. And they do go out to the baseball game to lift the spirits of both Taft and the staff. And he did throw out the first pitch, and in between the top of the seventh inning and the bottom of the seventh inning, Harry Caray's favorite time in the baseball game, Taft gets up. Seats are old, 19 inches across. Taft's a big man, over 300 pounds. Once got stuck in the White House bathtub. He's getting very, very uncomfortable sitting there. He gets up. Everybody else gets up. They're looking around. Ooh, the president gets up. We have to show him the proper respect because he may be leaving. Well, he wasn't leaving. He sat down. They all sat down. And that is how the seventh inning stretch allegedly started. Groucho, Chico, and Harpo also were part of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Night at the Opera. Quick synopsis of the movie. Groucho's working for Margaret Dumont. They go to Italy to find the world's greatest tenor so he could perform at Margaret Dumont's opera company. Instead, Groucho meets Harpo and Chico, and they have a friend, Alan Jones, who is a tenor, and somehow Groucho thinks that he's the greatest tenor in the world. They stow away on a ship, the scene where everybody falls out of the room because they want to eat. And they finally do get to the opera house, and they got to kill time because they got to knock off the real tenor to put Harpo and Chico's tenor in. And to kill some time, Harpo and Chico go into the orchestra pit and put sheet music in front of all of the musicians. All the musicians are playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And Groucho is selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Harpo Marx would return to the song on I Love Lucy, 1955. It was in numerous movies and television shows. The other thing that made baseball really popular among people who weren't baseball fans, these guys, Abbott and Costello, Paterson, New Jersey's own Lou Costello. In fact, in Paterson, there is a statue. I got to get out to Paterson one day and take a picture of me in the statue of Lou Costello. And baseball evolved from a game called rounders. You go up to the Berkshires and you go up to North Adams, Massachusetts. There's a little baseball museum dedicated to Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games for the New York Highlanders before they became the New York Yankees in 1904. And that museum, there's a little article from around 1792. And that article talks about baseball being played in the Berkshires in 1792. So it wasn't invented by Abner Doubleday in 1839, although the Mills Commission at the turn of the 20th century was looking for an heroic story about the creation of baseball in the United States. And they found this guy named Abner Graves in Denver, who was kind of a drunk, who claimed he was 5 years old in Cooperstown in 1839, and he watched Abner Doubleday lay out the diamond 90 feet by 90 feet by 90 feet by 90 feet, 60 feet, pitcher to catcher, although that wasn't the distance in the 1860s. And that's how baseball started, this guy's recollection when he was 5 years old. But baseball came out of the English game called the Rounders, and it made sense because most of the country in 1790s had citizenship in England. The vaudeville style or the burlesque style that Abbott and Costello used was called Rounders. And it was pretty simple. You had the smart aleck, in this case Bud Abbott, and you had the idiot, Lou Costello. And the smart aleck would answer the idiot's questions, and the idiot would be asking question after question after question, and he would get an unsatisfactory answer from, in this case, Bud Abbott, who, by the way, got 60% of the take, Costello 40%, because in comedy, from what my comic friends told me, history of comedy, you valued a straight man. The straight man kept things going. So you needed a good straight man, and the straight man always got 60% of the gate, whatever the gate was. So Costello is going round and round and round asking these questions and like, who's on first? That's the man's name. Who? Who? When he gets the check and he shows it to his wife, who sees it? You got who? Yeah, it goes round and round and round. That's why it was called Rounders. It is an American classic. Who's on first? A vaudeville style that was very common, or a burlesque style called Rounders. Baseball comes from a game called Rounders. And here's a question. Did Abbott and Costello pay Michael Musto $15 for the routine? Musto did the routine. Didn't do it very well. A lot of comedians, let's say, borrow from other comedians. And if they do it better, like Jerry Lewis did when he took all the old Borscht Belt material, he was up there from the time he was 14 and rewrote it for him and Dean Martin. He just did better than anybody. And that's why he was successful. Musto wasn't successful. So we don't know if they paid $15. John Joseph, who's a comic friend of mine, says, of course they paid $15. Max Docelli, who's another comic friend of mine, who worked ships and grew up with Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld and Carol Leifler and Elaine Boozler in that comedy, New York comedy scene in the late 1970s, said, no, we're comics. We steal everything. So we don't know if Musto actually got paid for the money for it. Was it a baseball burlesque routine? Well, possibly. There were two burlesques, Burlesque, family show, Burlesk, girls take the clothes off. Abbott and Costello met on the burlesque circuit QUE, although there's been some suggestions that Abbott actually did a version of Who's on First when he first got on the burlesque circuit in the late 1920s. But they meet on the burlesque circuit in the 1930s. They would premiere the routine on the Kate Smith Show. They got it around 1936. It took them about 2 years to get it into shape. And they were big players on the Kate Smith Show. They certainly weren't stars, but they became stars overnight. March 1938, they perform it for the first time, and the rest is history. They might have gotten some help from John Grant and Will Glickman, comedy writers. Grant was Costello's comedy writer for a long, long time into the 1950s. Abbott and Costello would perform the routine at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt, for Harry Truman, for Dwight Eisenhower. He'd be in movies with them, on radio, on TV. I mean, I used to watch the Abbott and Costello show when I was like 7 years old on Channel 11, WPIX in New York in the early 1960s. That was the one with Sidney Fields and Joe Besser as Stinky. So I watched it on there. Abbott and Costello were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. The first two outsiders had nothing to do with baseball in the Hall of Fame. About 15 years ago, Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer, was looking at his TV monitor, and he saw this on his TV monitor. Vin was doing the Dodger games, simulcasting the games. He did the first two innings on radio and TV, and then the rest of the games on TV. Vin, of course, started with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1950. And moved out to LA after the 1957 season. And he looks up at that picture and he says, now we have the answer to the eternal baseball question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who? The Dodgers had a player from South Korea by the name of who? And he's standing on first base. The answer. There it is. Who's on first? There was a Watt who played second base before the routine became famous in the 1920s. He played with Washington. I guarantee you this, there has never been a third baseman named I don't give a darn. Franklin Roosevelt. 3 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park. It's a great place to go for the day, Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library. And I needed some questions that Franklin had to answer. I do other talks. I do a talk on the 1936 Berlin Olympics and why did Roosevelt greenlight that? I do a talk on the early days of TV, and the first guy on commercial TV in the United States was Franklin Roosevelt, April 30th, 1939, from the New York World's Fair, greeting people to the World's Fair. 400 TVs were available in the New York area that day. And then there was the Green Light Letter, 1942. Hey, Franklin was a very nice host. Look at Eleanor. Eleanor's all dressed to the nines. They greet you well. They have books for you to read. They're a little stiff, but that's okay too. But I did get my answers. I got my answers for the 1936 Berlin Olympics. I got my answer for the 1939 TV. And I got my answer as to why baseball played in 1942 after Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941. In 1918, the season was cut short, not because of the Spanish flu, but because of World War I. And the Boston Red Sox and the American League owners didn't want to play anymore. They wanted to end in September. The National League wanted to go on to the end of the season. Compromise was reached. The season did end September 1st. They went right into the World Series. And that was the year that Babe Ruth pitched the Boston Red Sox to the 1918 World Series championship. Of course, they got rid of Babe and the curse of the Bambino after that. But Kennesaw Mountain Landis was the baseball commissioner. And December 8th, he doesn't know what to do, December 8th, 1941. So he writes a letter to Roosevelt, and the letters are up at Hyde Park, saying, what are we supposed to do? Roosevelt writes him back, I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5. He hasn't been to Yankee Red Sox games over the last 15 years. But then again, he died in 1945. And which can be got for very little cost. Well, maybe not the box seats at Yankee Stadium. But then again, Roosevelt could afford those. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. About 15, 18 years ago, I was with Dan Rooney, who is the president and owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we got to talking about World War II and football going in World War II. And he was telling me it was because Franklin Roosevelt sent that green light letter to Kennesaw Mountain Landis to say, you can play baseball, that we, National Football League, we all assumed we could continue playing. And the NFL continued playing, as did the National Hockey League. Although most of their players, Canadian, were in the war since 1939, not 1941. And whatever basketball was around, Harlem Globetrotters, Pittsburgh Wrens, National Basketball League, Industrial League Basketball in the Midwest, they would go on along with boxing and tennis and golf and horse racing. But they all got the green light because baseball, which was the big sport at that time, the king of sport at that time, Roosevelt said, go play. And they did. The movies certainly helped out baseball. Babe Ruth was in 10 movies himself. 1920 silent film called Hitting Home. It starred Babe as, guess what? A baseball player. He starred in Babe Comes Home. Guess what? Another baseball movie. That was a 1927 silent movie. And the way movies were made in those days, if you really didn't take good care of them, they would just disintegrate. Nobody's found a print that has survived in that movie. He was in the Harold Lloyd movie, which was a silent movie, 1928, Speedy. He portrayed himself in the cameo role as a baseball player, signing autographs. He sees a cab, and Harold Lloyd's the cab driver. He points to him, and he says he needs a cab, and you get the thing up there, says, we got to get to Yankee Stadium. And Harold Lloyd drove like a New York City cab driver in that film. Ruth overall was in 10 movies all together. The first one, of course, Heading Home. The last one, Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story. The first big baseball star who made the transition to the board, so to speak, on the vaudeville stage, Broadway plays, and movies was Mike Donlin, who was a pretty good player in his day. He was a .333 lifetime hitter, played with the New York Giants, but didn't play all that much because he took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville. He would retire in 1914. He'd go into the movies. typecasting right off the bat, his first movie, which also featured his New York Giants manager, John McGraw, who also thought of himself as kind of a movie star. He was in a number of movies. Meanwhile, Donlin made at least 53 appearances on film. Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig played a cowboy. Well, not quite a cowboy. Lou Gehrig is in a movie called Rawhide, 1938 movie. Not much of a movie. Lou Gehrig decides he can't take it anymore. He can't take the pressure of playing first base for the New York Yankees, and he's going to chuck it all in. And he's moving to Montana with his sister, not his wife, with his sister. And they bought a ranch, and he is going to spend the rest of his life relaxing and in solitude away from New York City. Gehrig is New York City born. Gehrig is New York City educated. He went to Columbia University. Gehrig plays with the New York Yankees. The farthest Lou Gehrig got away from New York City was living over here in New Rochelle on what is now called Lou Gehrig Way. And he was married to Eleanor. And but in the movie called Rawhide, he's running away with his sister. He has this news conference, as you could see, at Grand Central Terminal. Then the Iron Horse is going to get on an Iron Horse and go west to Montana. And that should be the end of this movie, but it's not. Within about a year and a half, he's diagnosed with the ALS. And the movie becomes something of a medical baseline and good for ALS research, because doctors could finally at least see somebody kind of deteriorating to where they have to go to the doctor. And they're able to see through this movie, whatever the movie is, Rawhide, how Gehrig was walking, how he was able to swing his arms, move his legs, turn his torso, move his neck when he was presumably healthier. So this was used in some sort of research for the ALS. It was funny because both Gehrig and Ruth, their biggest contributions may not have been on the baseball field, but in medicine. Gehrig films the 1938 Western called Rawhide, and he's gone to Montana, and somebody else is going to play first base for the New York Yankees. Hey, Bugs Bunny, my all-time hero, the absolute greatest animated comedian of all time. He was a great comedian. And he's a heckler in this cartoon. He's out in right field. They're in the polo grounds, and the Gas House Gorillas are just annihilating the Boston Teetotalers. This is a 1940 cartoon. The Teetotalers are guys who played in the 1890s, who had grown old, and they were playing the Gas House Gorillas. And he's heckling them. I'll beat you with one arm tied behind my back and all that other stuff. And, you know, so he's got his carrot juice, he's got his popcorn, he's got his carrot. And they accept his challenge, and Bugs Bunny would win. My wife will tell you that most of the things that I have learned in life were from Warner Brothers cartoons of that era. Bugs Bunny probably taught me more about history than any teacher I ever had in school. Also classical music, more so than any music teacher I ever had in school. Bugs Bunny would win that game. This is Field of Dreams. This is League of Their Own. I'm sorry, League of Their Own. There's Madonna jumping into Rosie O'Donnell's arms. Gina Davis is behind here. The guy who you don't see is Tom Hanks, who is the manager of this team, playing a character based on Jimmy Fox, who was a manager in this league that was founded by Phil Wrigley, the chewing gum guy out in Chicago, and the hero of many periodontists and oral surgeons and dentists, because that gum pulled your, they put holes in your teeth. Anyway, Casey Candel, who I interviewed in the 1990s, his mother, he played with the Montreal Expos, his mother was on one of these teams in Wrigley's league, and he was the technical advisor on this movie to make sure that they got it right based on his mother's notes. And Tom Hanks played the Jimmy Fox character in this movie. And the famous line from this movie is, "There's no crying in baseball." Tom Hanks is Jimmy Fox. There is Pride of the Yankees, the 1940 movie written by Paul Gallico, who is the former New York Daily News sports editor who went west to write movies, and also probably could find some of his books in the Summit Library, including the Poseidon Adventure and the So Goose children's stories. This starred Gary Cooper as Lou Gehrig, the 1940 movie. Bull Durham came out around 1988. Kevin Costner as Crash Davis, the veteran catcher, not good enough for the major leagues, but major league teams want him in the organization to teach knucklehead pitchers like Nuka Lelouch how to pitch and how to stay on the straight and narrow. Tim Robbins played that character. Ron Shelton wrote that movie. He was a minor leaguer with the Baltimore Orioles organization in the 1960s. And this character, the Tim Robbins character, is based on a guy by the name of Steve Dalkowski, who was about 5'9", could throw a baseball about 105 miles an hour, struck out everybody or walked everybody. There was no in between. Got a cup of coffee in spring training with the Baltimore Orioles back in the early 1960s. Never made it because he had an alcohol problem and other off-field problems. But the story here is that Crash Davis is living with Baseball Annie, Susan Sarandon, who likes to break in who she thinks are going to be star rookies in her own way. Bull Durham. Jerry Lewis, after O'Malley sent the Dodgers from Brooklyn to LA. I don't know if there are any Brooklyn Dodger fans in here, and I hope I don't offend you by using the name O'Malley. Anyway, Jerry Lewis explaining to Pee Wee Reese here what he wants done in the movie The Geisha Boy, which featured many Los Angeles Dodgers. Robert Redford up at the Rock Pile, the War Memorial Stadium in Buffalo. The Malmo book, The Natural, which is probably in the library as well. That was done in Buffalo. Kevin Costner talking to a Joe Jackson character. He's thrown out of baseball, Shoeless Joe. The Field of Dreams, where they put a baseball diamond in the middle of Iowa and have this game. Major League Baseball was supposed to have a game this year between Chicago and the Yankees in an Iowa cornfield, but that was knocked out by COVID-19. Billy Beane, the smartest guy who's ever lived, all you have to do is ask him, former #1 draft choice of the New York Mets in 1980, who was behind the what was called Moneyball, the book by Michael Lewis. Again, another book probably in the library. And this is the movie Moneyball, Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane, who was and is, even though right now he's 58 years old, very good-looking man. Walter Matthau, who never did anything bad in movies. He was always great in movies. And that goes back to A Face in the Crowd, through Grumpy Old Men, and all the roles he had with Jack Lemmon. 4 different movies. Anyway, The Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bail Bonds. Major League, which came out about 30 years ago with Charlie Sheen, another big movie. That is me 2 years ago in Pittsburgh at Forbes Field. Well, not Forbes Field, the wall at Forbes Field, which is in the which is right in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh, next to Shenley Park. In front of the 436 sign. That's the only thing that remains of Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. You can see the ivy growing on the wall. And the reason I bring that up is that Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates at one time. Got it in 1946. Bob Hope was part of the Cleveland Indians ownership in 1946. When Bill Veeck bought the team, and he stayed on through the mid-1960s. Now, Bing Crosby heard about this movie that was being made called Angels in the Outfield, and he thought the perfect place to film Angels in the Outfield was in beautiful Forbes Field, which was beautiful until it was run down in the 1950s and 1960s, right next to Shenley Park. Some of the movies, Rookie of the Year, Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball, and a host of other movies, which I haven't named all about baseball. Now, that is a very famous picture. That picture was done by Nat Fine. I knew Nat Fine in Rockland County when I started my career at WGRC Radio around 1978. Nat Fine won a Pulitzer Prize for that picture of Babe Ruth, a dying Babe Ruth, in 1948. And unfortunately, because newspapers consolidated the World Journal Tribune in 1964, and basically down to 3 newspapers in the 1970s in New York, the Times, the Daily News, and the New York Post. There was no need for Nat Fine's services anymore, even though he won a Pulitzer Prize, even though he took many, many pictures that you saw. And I was a kid. I was 22, 23 years old when the first time I met Nat, who was working for Orange and Rockland Utilities at the end of his career, taking pictures of shredded wires and squirrels laying on the ground after they were electrocuted by taking a bite out of a power line. And we're talking about this picture. And he said that Babe took plenty of pictures in the Yankee clubhouse, which was on the third base side of Yankee Stadium in 1948. And he said he was looking for something else. So he went into the third base dugout, went up a couple steps. You could see other photographers on the first base line, and just snapped this picture of a dying Babe Ruth on his baseball bat. Now, I had mentioned that Gehrig and Ruth, their real contributions to society may not have been in baseball. Why is that? Well, Babe Ruth was one of the first people to get chemotherapy in the United States, which was very experimental in 1947, 1948. He was dying from throat cancer. And the chemo initially worked, and then didn't work. And there was a recording of Babe that day with a very hoarse voice, really sounding terrible. And Nat happened to catch that picture. Again, selling baseball outside of baseball. And it's just Babe Ruth's final appearance on the field, a frail Babe Ruth. But chemotherapy, they experimented on him. It worked for a little while. Didn't work after a while, but they continued. But Babe may have made more of a contribution in the medical world than even on the baseball field. Homer Simpson, is he in baseball's Hall of Fame or not? Well, he's immortalized in cartoons. 1992 champion Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. Monty Burns' team beats Major League All-Stars. TV loved the Los Angeles Dodgers. I don't know who Sandy Koufax is signing that autograph for, whether it is Mr. Ed or Wilbur Allen Young. Sandy Koufax was on Mr. Ed. Herman Munster was on the Munsters, Leo Durocher was on the Munsters, trying to sign Herman to a contract with the Dodgers. It's surreal. Leo was the third base coach of the Dodgers. He hated getting up in the morning, just hated getting up in the morning unless he was playing a baseball game or coaching or managing a baseball game. Just, he wasn't a morning person. But he comes out of the bushes because he sees Herman playing with his son, Edward Wolfgang Munster, on the baseball field, and he's hitting long, long fly balls, and Leo falls in love with him. He has a tryout with the Dodgers. Notice the Munsters producers did not get the bill or did not pay for the Dodgers logo. Mr. Ed's people did. He's 7'4", weighs 560 pounds, and he's hurting people, so the Dodgers release him. A couple months later, out of the same bushes, Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, the Los Angeles Rams general manager of the National Football League team, sees Herman punting to his son Eddie, and Leo comes running out of the bushes. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Leo Durocher on the Munsters. Hey, the guy on the right is Al Ferrara. The guy on the left is Jim Lefevre. Al Ferrara from Brooklyn was with the Dodgers. He said he had never made it, or he knew he made it as a Major League Baseball player when he saw his face on the baseball card. Here they're playing headhunters, shrinking Gilligan's head because they're headhunters, and they're also seasoning him. I once asked Jim Lefevre, I said, there were so many people that went to that island. How come nobody ever knew where the 7 castaways were? And he said, and why? Ruin the TV show? Gilligan's Island. Johnny Roseborough, that looks very Dragnet-y, doesn't it? He was on Dragnet, 1968. Johnny Roseborough, just the facts, man, just the facts. The Dodger owner, Walter O'Malley, appeared with the Rifleman star in the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in Brandon in the TV show in 1965. Another Dodger first baseman, Wes Parker, tried to make it as an actor and did for a little while in the 1970s, but nothing ever really came of his acting career. Willie Davis, the center fielder, acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, and The Flying Nun. Roseboro was in Dragnet, 1968, Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. Now, if I was with you live, I'd be asking you who these guys are, but I'm not going to do it because we're on Zoom and there's a baseball game at 8:11. Some of you might want to watch. On the left is Phil Silvers, who played Sergeant Ernest Bilko in The Bilko Show, or You'll Never Get Rich, or The Phil Silvers Show. The guy on the right, well, Nat Hiken was the guy who wrote The Bilko Show. He also wrote Car 54, Where Are You?, which has a lot of baseball references in it as well. In Car 54, Where Are You?, actually, there is a story that takes place at Yankee Stadium featuring a pickpocket. But getting back to The Bilko Show, Hiken saw this guy, Steve Bilko, play with the Pacific Coast League Los Angeles Angels, loved the name, and Bilko became the name of The Phil Silvers Show and the character. And here's my first Yogi story. I said to Yogi one day, you know, I once saw you on The Bilko Show. What were you and your Yankee teammates doing at Fort Baxter, Kansas? Or in the Bronx? Yeah, I know you were in the Bronx. That's where it was shot. But you know, why were a number of the Yankees passing through, you know, Kansas at Fort Baxter? No, we're in the Bronx. We went over the George Washington Bridge. We went across Bronx Expressway, got off, went to the studio. At that point, Yogi was right. I was wrong. But the Yankees, about 5 of them, were on the Bilko Show in the mid-1950s. Donna Reed Show, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, the Munster Phil Silvers Show, known as Bilko as well. Some of the shows that baseball players appeared on. Aaron Spelling, who is the king of schlock TV, that's what he called it. He had Charlie's Angels, he had The Love Boat, he had the one Fantasy Island, the Bane, the Plane, and Dynasty. He had a whole bunch of them. And he used to name his characters. He'd go through the baseball encyclopedia, he'd find, which is both major and minor leaguers, and he'd find names and characters in the baseball encyclopedia, and he would name his TV characters like Captain Stubing of The Love Boat. He saw Moose Stubing's name. Moose Stubing was a longtime minor league player who finally managed in the major leagues with Anaheim in the late 1980s. Moose Stubing became Captain Stubing, Merrill Stubing of The Love Boat. John Forsythe, who is the voice of Charlie's Angels, who you never saw in Charlie's Angels, he had a great voice. His first paying job as, quote unquote, an actor performer was as the ballpark PA announcer at Ebbets Field in the 1950s. He would, of course, star in one of Spelling's biggest hits, Dynasty, in the 1980s. And there is Moose Stubing of the Bronx, who played a long time in El Paso and ended up in El Paso. And I once said, did you ever get any royalties to Moose? And he said, no, but I know that's my name on The Love Boat. And there is John Forsythe and Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon played Felix Unger in a movie called The Odd Couple. And there was a baseball scene in The Odd Couple in 1968, and he's calling Oscar Madison, who's a sports writer. And Oscar comes to the phone. And as he's talking about dinner to Felix Unger, Bill Mazeroski hits into a triple play of the Pittsburgh Pirates against the New York Mets, forcing Oscar to miss the triple play. Anyway, there is Jack Lemmon, and to his left, to your right, John Forsythe, both playing with the Hollywood All-Stars at Dodger Stadium. So John Forsythe comes the full circle from behind the microphone onto the field. And there's Bob Uecker, who I have known for, wow, I've known Bob Uecker for 35 years. Mr. Baseball, he's on the Johnny Carson show. Johnny Carson called him Mr. Baseball. And it was Al Herp, the trumpet player, who saw Bob Uecker, who was a mediocre at best catcher. His career was over with the Atlanta Braves. who was bouncing around the Southeast, working for the Braves and working on the nightclub act. Al Hirt saw him in Atlanta, called Carson, said, you got to get this guy on. Gets the guy on. He's great. Carson invites him to the couch. You made it when you were invited to the couch. I have a friend, Wayne Cotter, who told me all about his couch experience. Now, Johnny used to bring him back, and he didn't even have to do a performance. He just brought him back as a guest. He liked him. In the break, the commercial break, Johnny leaned over and said to Bob Uecker, is it true you're a baseball player? He said, I was. I have a baseball card, so I must have been. By the way, Bob Uecker hit Sandy Koufax as well as any baseball player. The only guy he could hit in baseball. Bob Uecker would go on to a career with ABC's Mr. Belvedere, where he was one of the stars between 1984 and 1990. Broadway, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets, and Lola wants you. Damn Yankees, 1954 or so, about the Washington Senators, the inability to win a championship. Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil so they could win the championship. At that point, it was only 21 years since Washington had last won the championship, but the Yankees winning and winning and winning and winning, and Joe Hardy decides he wants to do something about it, and the only way he could is selling his soul to the devil. Damn Yankees! Joe Hardy sells his soul so Washington can win. The other big song there, you gotta have heart. Washington won the World Series last year in 2019, the first one since 1933, but they didn't have a team between 1971 and 2005. You gotta have heart, and this is, I could segue here. You don't know this, but Jerry Stiller is my cousin. And Jerry Stiller and Ann Miller were on the Ed Sullivan Show many, many times, about 3 dozen times. And Ed liked Jerry and Ann. There was a good chemistry between them, and I asked Ed about all the Jerry about all the herky-jerky movements, and this was to see what time it was, get the acts going. And ladies and gentlemen, over here, the Beatles, while he was a ring announcer for the Golden Gloves boxing tournament back in the 1920s when he was a sports writer for the New York Daily News. So what you saw with the Sullivan Show was an old boxing ring announcer introducing people. Anyway, he has the amazing Mets on in October of 1969, 51 years ago after they won baseball's World Series. Tom Seaver is second row, all the way to the right. 3 to the left of him is Tug McGraw, one of my favorite people. Tug used to name his pitchers because his curveball would be called a Bo Derek because it had a tail on it. This is politically incorrect. His fastball was called Peggy Lee. Why Peggy Lee? Is that all there is? Is that all there is? In the double-breasted 6-button suits, Art Shamsky, who I still see every once in a while around New York. Ron Swoboda next to him to his left, who's in New Orleans, who's one of my favorite characters of all time. Jerry Stiller, of course, was on The Sullivan Show. And he was also on this show, Seinfeld. Great segue, right? Segue from Sullivan to Seinfeld. George Steinbrenner was an NBC veteran by the time he got on the Seinfeld Show. He had hosted Saturday Night Live once. There was a parody of Steinbrenner playing every position, being manager, coach, general manager, and owner of the Yankees, and wasn't that far from the truth. And there was also the Chico Escuela night in St. Petersburg, honoring Chico Escuela, the greatest Met who never was because of injuries. But George became a staple on the Seinfeld Show. And there were 3 storylines suggested by George Steinbrenner, as Jerry Stiller and I talked about it. One was called Missing George, another board meeting moved, and the other different uniforms. Now, let me give you the real story and what turned into a script written by Larry David, because George would send the story ideas into Larry David, who would translate it into television. Missing George. Well, George owned American Shipbuilding Company in Tampa, Florida. And he had an employee that he thought, he's hanging out with the wrong type of guys. And he was always a little worried about him. He had his suspicions that this guy might be in trouble one day. Well, one day comes. It's Friday afternoon, and George leaves the office. He comes back on Monday morning, and the guy's car is there. Now, George used to get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, long before anybody else got there. He starts getting word. Why is his car here? Do you go home? And he sends out an all points bulletin, or asks the Tampa police, all points bulletin, to find this guy. Well, this guy went away for the weekend with his friends. And George breathes a sigh of relief when he sees him. And he asks, why'd you leave the car here? He said, I went away. Turns into a story, Missing George Costanza, where they presume George Costanza leaves his car at Yankee Stadium, not seen for the weekend. They presume he's dead. And the actor who plays George Steinbrenner goes to the apartment where Frank Costanza, played by my cousin Jerry Stiller, lives. And George Steinbrenner, whose voice is narrated or dubbed in by Larry David, says, Mr. Costanza, we think George is dead. We think George is dead. And Frank Costanza, my cousin Jerry, looks at him. You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Jay Buhner had a good career with Seattle, and Ken Phelps was a washout with the Yankees. But that was the takeaway from there. Board meeting move. Now, if you knew George, I knew George in the 1980s into the 1990s. He saw your food. He liked it. It was his food, too. There was a board meeting, and they moved the board meeting because somebody brought in some food that George liked, and it became a show where George Costanza brings in the calzone, and George wants it, and they moved the whole meeting to whatever restaurant there is at Yankee Stadium. George experimented with different material for uniforms with the Tampa Yankees of Class A baseball back in the 1970s, and that became a show too. And Yankees were on the show. Young Derek Jeter and Danny Tartabull and Buck Showalter were on that show as well. And that didn't stop the producers from actually thinking that George should be on the show. He did film a scene, a real George there, and he thought he was some sort of thespian probably. And he's with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who played Elaine, and the scene does not go well, and it's cut out. Seinfeld said he actually did the scene in the show. It was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. It wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Seinfeld grew up as a Mets fan, and Keith Hernandez and Roger McDowell were on the show. And this is a show where George Costanza thinks that Keith is stealing Jerry from him as his best friend. And also Keith dates Elaine Bennis. Two-part series of that show. Hernandez said when Scott Boras, his agent, who's still around in 2020, we're going back 30 years with that, asked him if he wanted to be on Seinfeld. He said, what's that? Boras said, oh, they'll fly you out first class. You'll be in the nice hotel. They'll pay you $15,000. Keith said, oh, I've heard of Seinfeld. To this day, they're good friends since the show. Now, I was going to take this out. Wally Pipp. I figured 95 years ago, nobody cares. But I watched the opening episode of Jeopardy this year. Season 37, episode 1, the COVID episode, with Alex. And I'm watching, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the show, there's a question about Wally Pipp. I say, Wally Pipp, and they got it right. I'm saying, Wally Pipp, that's staying in here. Wally Pipp was beamed, hit in the head with a pitch in May of 1925, had some headaches, and he had a concussion probably, and he's replaced by Babe Ruth. And for years and years and years, people would say, don't get Wally Pipp, don't get Wally Pipp. The myth, he lost his job to Gehrig on June 2nd, 1925, because of a headache. The moral of the story, don't call in sick because someone else will do your job and they do it better. The Yankees were bringing up Lou Gehrig regardless of whether he was beamed or not. Wally ended up with Detroit and made more money playing baseball with the Newark Bears than he did with the New York Yankees. Babe Ruth died of throat cancer, but he was in a cigarette ad, Smoother and Better, Old Gold Cigarettes presenting Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. It looks like he's up in Ossining at Sing Sing on Old Sparky there. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Not a cough in a carload. Chesterfield, ABC, always buy Chesterfield. Bucky Harris smokes it, the New York Yankees manager. Bob Elliott, the MVP of the 1948 National League season with the Boston Braves. He smokes it. Ted Williams presumably smokes it. He's holding it up. Stan Musial, someone looks like he knocked out one of his teeth to put that in his mouth. The Cardinals, Joe DiMaggio. I can't imagine Joe ever putting his hand in his pocket to pay for anything. He has it, and Ewell Blackwell is smoking. Always buy Chesterfield, the baseball man's cigarette. Yogi, Joe Garagiola. I knew Joe. Joe and Yogi grew up together, Dago Hill. That's what they called it. I'm not being politically correct here. Dago Hill in St. Louis, sons of immigrants from Italy. And they knew each other from the time they were 2 until Yogi passed away at the age of 90, and Joe passed away about a year later. And Joe once told me, he says, you know, when Yogi steps in it, he steps in it. Yoo-hoo is vile stuff, in my opinion. It was chocolate water. But anyway, Yoo-hoo, Yogi drinks it. Mickey maybe put some Cutty Stark in there, but he drinks it. Moose Skowron, one of my favorite people of all time to interview. Moose Skowron went to Arthur Murray's dance studio. Casey Stengel sent him there. Had a major league bat, couldn't play defense. And Casey thought he could play first base only after he learned dance moves. And Moose once told me, I learned dance moves. I became the most popular man in the dance floor. He said, take a look at me. My name's Moose. I met my wife, all because of Arthur Murray, had a baseball career, and Elston Howard. Yogi meets the Oliveri family. They're putting out Yoo-hoo at a New Jersey country club in 1955. The brand can't get on the supermarket shelves. So they're thinking, well, maybe if Yogi liked it. Yogi tasted the drink. The Oliveri said, what's your opinion? Yogi says, thumbs up. Yogi's on board. And all of a sudden, they are now on supermarket shelves. And he's in the office. Dave Kaplan told me this story. It got me this story. Dave was the curator of the Yogi Berra Museum. One day I was in the office and the phone rang. When no one else was around, I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling me asked me if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi. Yogi sold Italian dressing, craft Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything, sure makes swell salads. Presto Light, high-level battery. I'm old enough to have had a battery that needed water. I only put water in twice a year in 1973. 1966, Caprice station wagon. Yogi Berra says, I add water only 3 times a year. Presto Light, high-level battery. Yogi in the 1980s was in the Miller Lite commercials. So was Marv Throneberry. I don't know why they want me in this commercial. Marvelous Marv with the 1962 Mets. Yogi, hey, this Christmas, asked Mom and Dad for a Shelby, the winner's bike. He was selling bicycles. Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe had the baseball romance of the century in 1954. Big news. Not on the baseball field. Joe was gone for 2.5, 3 years by this point. He's at the Stork Club, guaranteed didn't pay for the cigarette to drink or anything at the Stork Club that night with Marilyn. Jolton Joe elopes with Marilyn, January 14th, 1954. They go to San Francisco. About 9-10 months later, Marilyn files for divorce, signing only mental cruelty. And this, well, not 26-foot Marilyn, normal Marilyn, had a lot to do with the end of the marriage because Joe was on the set the day they shot that scene from In 7-Year Itch. And apparently things got a little testy at the DiMaggio Monroe house that night, and she soon filed for divorce. It's in Stamford, Connecticut 3 years ago. And Marilyn's derriere is facing the entrance of the First Congregational Church in Stamford. And the first thing that church goers did when they left the building was to see Marilyn's derriere. On my left and her left, you're right on the screen, there's another church, and the first thing they saw was her halter top. Joe wanted a few things in a wife. He wanted a wife who cooked dinner, a wife who stayed home, a wife who didn't make more money than he did, and a wife who wasn't more famous than he was. He failed on all four accounts there. She went off to marry Arthur Miller, and DiMaggio always hoped that one day he would marry her again. After she died, he sent a red rose to her crypt every day of his life. Now, songs in baseball, Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. We Didn't Start the Fire. Joe is in that one. Joltin' Joe. Joe's in that one. Did you see Jackie Hit the Ball? Duke Ellington. Mickey, which was about Mickey Mantle, sung by Teresa Brewer. Now let's talk about Mrs. Robinson, a song you've probably heard about 15,000 times, probably a bigger hit than Bridge Over Troubled Water, which was the biggest song of 1970. Anyway, Johnny Blanchard told me a story, Yankee third-string catcher in 1961, told me a story that he had heard about Joe and Paul Simon meeting for dinner. And Joe walking in, and he's introduced to Paul Simon, and he said, "What do you mean? What do you mean? Where have you gone? Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? I'm here. I'm talking to you. I did a Mr. Coffee commercial. I did a Bowery commercial. You know, why am I here? You know, I'm here." Mrs. Robinson started out as Mrs. Roosevelt, and it started out the movie The Graduate, a 37-second or so snippet of do 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 do. And people said, flush out the song. He did. And Paul Simon was looking for a hero in the song. And he plays the song to Mike Nichols, who had produced the movie The Graduate, who became a big fan of Simon and Garfunkel. And he said, great song, it's now Mrs. Robinson. So he writes the song, and he's looking for a hero in the song, and he ends up with DiMaggio. And he tries to intellectually explain why he chose Joe instead of Ted Williams or Eleanor Roosevelt. And you couldn't explain that to him intellectually. Eventually, Joe, okay, whatever, you know, okay, fine, I'm in the song. And Paul picks up the tab for dinner, and that's the end of that. Now, Paul goes on the Dick Cavett show to explain the song. I said I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero. He thought of Eleanor Roosevelt. The song was named after Eleanor Roosevelt originally, or Ted Williams, and that genuine heroes were in short supply. And also, Joe had left in 1951. Paul was 10 years old, never saw him again. So that's why, where'd you go? He being DiMaggio, accepted the explanation, thanked me, we shook hands and said good night. He's on the Cavett show, and Cavett knows that DiMaggio and Mantle hate each other. DiMaggio looked to his left in 1951. He sees this beautiful, blonde, built like a Greek god man with the great baseball talent, and he's 37 years old on his way out, so there's jealousy there. There's a fly ball hit to right field in the 1951 World Series. Mantle, who could fly at that time, trips over a sprinkler, tears up his knee, and he always blamed DiMaggio for that because he thought Joe loafed on the ball. Mickey asked Simon one day, why'd you use him? Why not me? And he said, because Mickey Mantle doesn't sound as good as Joe DiMaggio in the song. Simon told Dick Cavett, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Terry Cashman and I share the same periodontist in Riverdale, New York, in the Bronx. Terry Cashman is working on Jim Croce anthology that is supposed to be coming out soon. But he was baseball's balladeer back in the 1980s. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke talking baseball, Terry Cashman. And there's somebody missing in that picture. Duke is there. Joe's not. Willie is there. Mickey is there. Joe was airbrushed out of the record sleeve, and he is not mentioned in the record. Terry wrote a whole bunch of baseball songs in the 1980s. The Scooter, Phil Rizzuto. He is probably the only man who's in baseball's Hall of Fame and has a gold record. I know Meatloaf from here in Westchester and Yankee Yankee Stadium and a couple other places. And I asked, how did Rizzuto get on your record, Paradise by the Dashboard Light? And he said, we're looking for Phil Rizzuto to fill the gap in the song, which is about a guy who wants to get to home plate with a girl in a car. And he said it took Rizzuto about 100 takes before he sounded like Phil Rizzuto. And he said it was frustrating. Be Phil, be Phil. And eventually he was Phil. Rizzuto provides a play-by-play of a broadcast. The player's aggressive base running. He only gets him called out a few times. Eventually he tries for home on the suicide squeeze. And Scooter builds up the tension. Afterwards, Rizzuto was told by his kids, who were going to college in Boston at the time, late 1970s, the song was about sex. Huckleberry, he lied to me. This is the same guy who's on with Bill White one day. And Bill White says on Channel 11, WPIX, the Yankees broadcast. And by the way, Phil and Bill White were very, very tight. Bill used to visit him when he was in the assisted living home, as did Yogi. Yogi saw him 3 times a week. Anyway, White says, oh, this pitcher has got good rhythm today. And Scooter says, you know, Cora and I use the rhythm method. Baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards. Cy Berger invented the modern baseball card. 5 cents, 5 cards. Stick of bubble gum. Your dentist, periodontist, and oral surgeon, thank you. Because when you bit into that piece of gum, it was like biting into a desk or biting into a floor, and it probably ruined your teeth. Baseball cards could teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, and gamble. Because if you had a favorite player, you could look at the back of the baseball card, and if you knew multiplication tables, division, addition, or subtraction, you could have up-to-date statistics. It was also your entree into gambling. Whoops, there you go. Gambling, flipping cards, but you didn't know that. This was the first gambling that you ever did. Win-lose. Also, geography. Ever want to know where a player came from? Look it up, get a map, see it. Bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in, they have the whirling, whirling, whirling sound, the bicycle flaps. But baseball now in the 21st century, there really are no new songs. There's not a Mrs. Robinson, although it was Take Me Out to the Ball Game and other songs in the 20th century. Not much new literature. Hemingway, and you got Old Man in the Sea in the library, I'm sure. Hemingway, 1938, wrote about the Great DiMaggio in Old Man in the Sea, which leads me to another Yogi story. Again, this is from Dave Kaplan. And in the 1950s, Ernest Hemingway sees a Yankee game, and he's brought down to the Yankee clubhouse. And Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, so it goes, and they get to Yogi. Ernest Hemingway, meet Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, meet Ernest Hemingway. Yogi puts out his hand and offer to shake Ernie's hand and says, hey, Ernie, what newspaper you write for? Ernie should have said Kansas City Star. There are really no new movies around these days, and baseball has become just another sport. Thank you, Tresha. I appreciate it. Thank you. Homer Simpson is in baseball's Hall of Fame. There was a display of him from the 1992 cartoon. Homer Simpson, Baseball Hall of Famer, along with Casey at the Bat, John Fogerty's 1985 song, Center Field, League of Their Own, and Who's on First. That's Joe Namath. That's me with the hair on the right, 1988. My friend Bruce Morton on the left. Bruce comes to some of these talks. This is the 20th anniversary of the New York Jets winning the Super Bowl. Joe Namath cements the Super Bowl as America's preeminent sports event, with the Jets beating Baltimore 16-7, January 12, 1969. Football had eclipsed baseball by 1965 as the most popular sport in America. In 1950, it was baseball, horse racing, boxing. That was 1, 2, and 3. Horse racing is gone. Boxing is gone. Muhammad Ali, that's me and Ali in 1985 rather. Ali could not save boxing. He was gone by 1982. Horse racing survives because of casinos and many racetracks. Jim Bouton. Jim Bouton. You have the book Ball 4, I'm sure, in the library, Jim Bouton. 1970, probably the quintessential baseball book. Humanized players. Hey, we now know Mickey Mantle drank, right? Bowie Kuhn, the baseball commissioner, absolutely hated the book. It's me and Jim, 2007, Yogi Berra's museum, the only time that we were ever in the same place speaking. Although we had crisscrossed a lot. Jim passed away last year. I wouldn't call him a friend, but I'd call him an acquaintance. And of course, he lived in New Jersey for a long time. He passed away last year in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. The book was one of the most influential books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library, and I'm sure you could find it at the Summit Library. It was also used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause, which binded a player to the team he signed with as a teenager in perpetuity. Soccer is a club baseball. That was me in 2015. I was in a movie called Sons of Ben, which is all about soccer in Philadelphia, their soccer team. At the Trocadero Theater was the world premiere, and I'm on the red carpet as I am in that movie. We will leave with Yogi, of course. And it ain't over till it's over, right? It ain't over till it's over. Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. If you take a fork, if you see a fork in the road, take it. You better go to their funeral because they won't go to yours. Carmen Berra, Mrs. Berra, talking about her son, Tim. Yogi, Tim went to see Dr. Zhivago the other day. What's wrong with him now? I wish I had a great story about it ain't over until it's over. You know, Yogi has been quoted in front of the Supreme Court of the United States more than anybody else in the history of the court. I wish I had a great story, but I don't. This is going to be a letdown. It ain't over until it's over, but I'll tell you the story anyway. Mike Dyer, who now lives in Sarasota, Florida, a guy I've known for about 40 years, was a sports writer. And he was writing for the Long Island Press in 1973. And Yogi's Mets, a lot of guys were injured. Seaver was injured. Grote was injured. They had a whole bunch of injuries. And they were just hanging. They were just treading water all year. But in September, they get close enough where the team could actually win the National League pennant. But they can't lose. They cannot lose. They have to go on this streak to have a chance to win the National League East. And one stumble, and that could be it. And there is that one stumble at Shea Stadium one day. Mets lose. And the writers all gather around Yogi's desk in 1973, the Resolute desk of Shea Stadium, which really wasn't a Resolute desk. And they're gathering around, and after a baseball game, as a reporter, I noticed this. You have to act the part, which means you got to be glum after a team loses. So everybody's glum, everybody's quiet. There's no record, there aren't any, no music's playing or anything. And Mike Dyer asks the question, Yogi, is it over? Yogi's answer, ain't over until it's over. It's the whole story. The whole story. It ain't over until it's over, but it's over. I want to thank Robin for inviting me. I want to thank you for being a lovely audience. And if anybody has any questions, you can unmute your mic or put it into the chat, and we will take some questions from anybody. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody? I'm here. You got for any base? Yeah. Anybody? Well, if nobody has any questions, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody at the Summit Library, Robin and everybody else who put this together on Zoom. And we have another one next month. I don't know what date. If you give me a second here, I will I will tell you when the next one is. It is November 10th, and we are going to talk about either the Super Bowl or we're going to talk about the history of pro football. I don't have it there, but you will find the history of pro football is filled with people, bootleggers, gamblers, and other characters who actually founded the National Football League. Tim Merritt, the New York Giants owner, was a bootlegger and a bookie and a gambler. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. My name is Evan Weiner, and I hope to see you again at some point. Thank you, Summit Library. Bye-bye.